Welcome, Collective Nation. In the studio, we have Shri. He's the managing partner of Point72 Private Investments, the institutional private investment business of Point72 Asset Management. He oversees the Point72 Ventures business, leads the deep tech investment team, and co-leads the consumer investment team. I'm your host, Thomas Joshi. Today, we'll explore Shri's memorable experiences as an engineer at BAE Systems and In-Q-Tel. Shri outlines a new AI paradigm for human in the loop. We go from a human-centric approach to one where the model is in the driver's seat of workflows and the human is an observant passenger. Using this novel framework, we'll drill into the question, what's different about AI, and compare that to what happened before. Shri believes that AI is poised to ignite a second industrial revolution, revolutionizing how knowledge workers operate, much like steam engines did for factory workers. Finally, today's conversation is a masterclass in not just AI, but the meta skill of how to learn more about the AI industry and develop your own convictions. We dive into how Shri synthesizes vast amounts of information about the AI industry, how he conducts conversations with experts shaping his decisions, and he'll offer advice to aspiring AI entrepreneurs. Shri is here to inspire and educate. Let's dive in. Hey Shri, thank you so much for joining us today. Would love to get started with you just telling us about your work experience, why you chose those positions, and what you're most proud of, and how they led to your current work.
Sure. Great to meet Thomas. My work experience. I like to tell people I mistimed the market twice. So I graduated with a degree in electrical computer engineering and a graduate degree in electrical computer engineering just as the dot-com bubble was bursting. And so while I went to college with this expectation that I would is my way to get out of Ohio and move to the West Coast and join some startup or be a part of Silicon Valley. Turned out 2002 was not the best time to do that. And so rather than enthusiastically moving out to California, like the people who graduated just the year before me did, I had to figure out where I was going to spend my time. And it turned out it was post 9/11, and there's this huge sort of rush of folks that got really interested in national security and defense all over again, and found myself to be one of those people. And so the job I got out of college was at a firm called BAE Systems. And honestly, I think it's a good lesson to folks, maybe not what I expected going into college, but turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Got a chance to work with amazing, smart people, building systems that benefited national security, the defense community, and the intelligence community. And I spent 8 years at BAE building communication systems and electronic warfare systems. Awesome time. So did that, thought, hey, I'll go to business school. And, business school will allow me to transition into the entrepreneurial things that I wanted to do. And I went to business school in New York just as the financial crisis was hitting. In fact, my first year is when I was taking this class on hedge fund finance, just as Lehman Brothers was falling apart. And so, second time I missed time in the market, perhaps not the best time to get into sort of greater risk taking. But once again, this lesson of, hey, take advantage of the opportunities presented to you. I finished business school and I learned about a place called In-Q-Tel, which is the strategic venture arm of the U.S. intelligence community. Amazing place. They invest in technology on behalf of the mission of national defense and security. And I already had a security clearance. I already had this sort of love of technology. I already had an interest in knowledge about who the customers were, what the problems were, and I got a chance to join there and make investments on behalf of to sort of support folks within the community. It's an awesome job. I spent 6 years there, invested in everything from RF hardware all the way up to sort of machine learning software as machine learning is becoming a thing, and that's what sort of allowed me to pivot to come to Point72, right? I'll say that ended up being somewhat of a sort of a surprising thing as well. I was planning on leaving In-Q-Tel to go start a company, and I really wanted to build something on my own. And I don't know if just be embarrassed about this or not, but rather than we told sort of friends leave to start a company, they seemed more interested in hiring me as a investing partner than they were in funding me as an entrepreneur. But Point72 offered me this opportunity to get a chance to build a venture team from scratch, and so I got to scratch that entrepreneurial itch.
So do you do you think that there's a different kind of personality composition between the people who are founders and kind of the VC persona? Like, what do you think about you lend itself to being on the investing side of the table?
Yeah. I think that both sides requires a natural curiosity. I think that those that have a bit of ADD, I think investing ends up kind of being an interesting place to be because, building a company requires a real commitment to that specific idea for a long period of time. I will admit that as I think about my current role, the part of the job I enjoy the most is, I love meeting founders. I love learning about new technology, but I've really enjoyed getting a chance to sort of build a venture firm, right? And that build process, I haven't gotten sick of it after 6 years here, right? It's been fantastic to continue to sort of evolve and think about what our industry needs to look like and what our company needs to look like to win in the venture capital community.
And going back to the decision to go to business school, I think having been in the Valley and SF for a little bit, there is a little bit of some people, are not for going to business school. Some people are, and say that kind of changed their life, or they met really cool people and changed the way they think. Like, how did you think about going to business school beforehand, and what was your perspective on the other side of that experience?
Yeah, I don't spend a bunch of time sort of thinking about whether I made a good choice or a bad choice in the past. I just sort of think ahead. My general advice to folks is to not go to business school. I think that business school is valuable in one of two cases, and maybe people can disagree with me and they have other cases. The two cases where I think it makes sense. One is you want to make a serious career pivot, and you think that business school can be the fulcrum to allow you to make that pivot. So that's number one. Number two is you're in an industry where getting that business school degree is sort of a prerequisite to moving forward. So if you're a analyst or an associate in private equity, you're gonna have to go to one of 5 business schools to go back as a VP and work your way up to being a managing director, right? It's an example of a place where you have to go to business school. If it's not those two things, I generally think you're better off getting real work experience, getting more operational experience and sort of progressing your career that way. It's also really expensive. And so I'll be honest, part of the reason I went is my employer at the time, BAE Systems, paid for it, right? I got paid my salary, and I got, they sort of supported my business school education. And so if that wasn't the case, I probably wouldn't have gone.
Yeah, and the decision, how did you like, working as an engineer? What were some things that you really enjoyed versus things that you felt were missing or lacking from your experience for your personality type?
Yeah, I'll tell you, my engineering experience is very Defense Department focused, right? The part of it that I think it gave me was a real understanding of how different what you learn in academia is from the real world of building systems, right? And that real world experience of having to build stuff and see it not work and figuring out why that's the case, and having some person be like, yeah, I could have told you that wasn't going to work because of something they had learned from their experience. So it really made me value people that have real experience as opposed to sort of learned, something they read somewhere or watched a video about. The part of it that I think I found frustrating and sort of, made me not want to remain an engineer working in sort of the government focus was the speed at which stuff was happening, right? I spent 6 years on the same program, that building the same system. And, I sort of at odds with my time at InQtel, where our job was to figure out, hey, how can I get this capability in the hands of a user within, the intelligence community within 6 months, a very different timeline, right? And I found that latter one far more interesting, and for my own interests, way better.
Yeah, I think it is very interesting when you say the history of the partnership between engineering and government. You see projects like Project Skunkworks, which basically achieve monumental success in a very short time frame. And I think there's a lot of questioning right now into how can we speed up development cycles. Not, I think with Clayton Christensen's book Innovative Solution, I think there's a lot of questioning around how can we have large organizations like large companies speed up their acceleration of innovation. And I think now recently we've had more questioning of how do we speed up large government engineering cycles. So I think that's just a general questioning that we've seen across the board. So great to go into your background, and would love to also get a little bit about get a little sense of you outside of work. I see you mentioned you're really into home coffee roasting. So like, what's like the most unique or unexpected coffee bean roast you've ever tried at home? And like, what was the story behind it? How do you incorporate that hobby into your weekly routine?
Yeah, coffee. So it's sort of fascinating. I actually didn't drink coffee at all until I started dating my wife. I think a lot of folks think of me as like relatively high energy, but I'm definitely the low energy person in my relationship, and so I had to drink coffee basically to keep up with her. Um, and coffee roasting became my COVID hobby. And I'll be honest, like part of what got me into coffee, what's gotten me into wine, and other things is I love cooking. I want to be a great cook, great chef, and in order to cook well, I think you have to be able to taste well. And I think it's really important to like make yourself be able to taste better, and that requires practice. And so I remember, having drank a lot of coffee in my time, having a lot of coffee meetings. Like you'd read these like descriptors. I know people pick up a bag of coffee. I'm sure you can. Anyone listening could do this. It'll be like, here's the descriptors. It's like juicy citrus and blueberry. You're like, blueberry? What the hell is a coffee bean? And it all sounds like BS. And I was
Right.
100% convinced it was nonsense. And I roasted this bean. It's an Ethiopian bean. It's called Dorato Bomb,
Mm.
Bobmbe. And I roasted this bean. And usually like you want to give it a couple of days to off gas a little bit, because when you roast, one of the byproducts is a lot of carbon dioxide, and the beans need to release some of that carbon dioxide. So I waited a couple of days, and then I ground it and tasted this bean. And honest to God, I was like, all I taste is blueberry. This is ridiculous. I was like stunned by this
They were
revelation.
right.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, what? This is not possible. And I gave it. I was like, hey, I gave it to my wife. I was like, hey, try this. She's like, oh my God, it tastes like blueberry. And just made me like believe for the first time that like these pompous coffee experts actually maybe
Right.
knew something, right? And since then it's been great, because like sometimes you get it really hits you and you get those flavor descriptors, and other times it's still nonsense, but like it made me think that like maybe it wasn't all fake.
No, I totally agree. I think one is I'm trying to get really great at making chai. So my mom she has a formula she wrote down for me so that I could repeat the way she makes it, and it's never the same as when she makes it. And I'm pretty sure she's purposely leaving a step in there because I do it to the T. I mean, she has it written down to okay, leave milk for X minutes, and that's something I'm trying to get perfect as well. And I think because I can't tolerate if it's not absolutely perfect, I can't have the chai. I just go for coffee and just chug some coffee down. But I totally agree with that sentiment of the attention to detail that's required. Great. So let's dive in to
Sure.
sort of insights from AI and deep tech and your experiences in the
Mhm.
space. So can you share a memorable experience or project from your time at In-Q-Tel, especially related to AI and intelligence community challenges, that has had a significant impact on your perspective on technology and innovation?
Yeah. I can't like say a whole bunch about like my In-Q-Tel
Hmm.
time, but I'll give you something I thought was really fascinating. Right, one of the benefits of working at In-Q-Tel is I got a chance to walk the halls of a bunch of different intelligence agencies, and one thing I realized is that folks within the community don't get a chance to walk down the halls of the other agencies, right? And so I got to see patterns from speaking with people in 5, 6, 10 different agencies that people who worked every day at these places didn't get a chance to. And you saw this time and time again. We spent a lot of time. I ended up leading an effort at In-Q-Tel called Lab 41. Now it's just called IQT Labs, and a lot of the projects that we worked on, you can go download on GitHub, but like, a number of like projects where you learned how much they spent like having a custom development done, right? Some computer vision algorithm they had built to identify a particular object or do facial detection or something like that. And, they'd spend an enormous amount of money in a pre deep learning era set of algorithms to accomplish some task. And we'd walk away having met with folks from 5 different agencies being like, we could spend 6 weeks building something using open source software and like the latest advancements in deep learning and build something that's, way better, that would cost them nothing to operate. And I think that's like one of these back to sort of, you're making this comment about like, so the innovator's dilemma here, right? Like historically, um, the government couldn't count on the commercial markets having, and like the open source community building stuff that's actually relevant to their mission as well. And it was just like a really amazing thing to see. Like, hey, these problems they have are actually problems that like are being resolved for different reasons in the commercial market. There's no reason why we can't use this technology and build something that's way better than what they've got at a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time.
So this is, I guess, a common repeating pattern, which is a group of people try to solve a problem with the existing tools, kind of knock on the problem, and can't really make any progress. New solutions come out that are more advanced, that totally surpass old tools, and the people who had started working on the problem earlier on kind of give up and quit. When if they just kind of stuck with it and adopted new tools, they would have experienced an entirely new innovation cycle or curve. I think you're alluding to.
Yep.
We saw it with personal computer. We continue to see this with distributed computing with commoditized hardware in the early 2000s. And so I guess let's maybe stick with government. Like, what can they do? What is the solution there? Is it to keep at it and keep working on a particular problem until you can find a solution, or is it maybe partnering with other people outside of the government, working with people in kind of the Silicon Valley area, because they may be able to bring those tools and know the latest and greatest tools that can help them?
Yeah, it's much broader question than it's easy to answer in a short period of time. I guess I'd suggest that the sort of the substantive problem that the government has in acquisition is that there are products that the commercial community are just not going to build, right? And what those products are has changed over time. So I'll give you an example. Like even today, like there's no startup that's gonna be like, what we should do? We should build a nuclear weapon, right? Like, let's be honest. Like that is a thing that to the extent it needs to get built, the government is going to contract with a small number of U.S. government contractors that can go do that thing, right? So let's put that in the category of permanently going to be nation state built and funded, right? But like even something, so historically, maybe you're like, hey, I need a launch capability, like a capability to send satellites into space. Historically, that was the thing the government's like, hey, nobody else can do this. We have to fund the capability to put stuff in space, right? That for 50 years, they had to fund, right? They had to spend the money, enormous amounts of funds, and to build that. And it takes time to realize, hey, actually, maybe we don't need to do that. There are commercial companies now delivering this capability. We should just be like, hey, who can deliver this to me at the cheapest price? I'll take advantage of it, right? And so I think step one for the government is to constantly reassess what needs to be a custom development. If you need to build an aircraft carrier, I'm sorry, but that's not something that like Meta is going to build for you, right? Or the open source community is going to build for you. But facial detection algorithm, maybe you had to build it custom 20 years ago, but like realistically speaking, maybe you could just find that off the shelf now, right? And just be constantly reassessing that. And the second thing you got to figure out are ways in which to like actually acquire those items, right? One of the things that's gotten increasingly complex over the course of the last like 50 years is how to actually win a government contract, right? It was, I mean, part of the design of In-Q-Tel was to help connect these startups that are never going to go think, hey, you know what? Who might be interested in my software is the CIA, right? Like find a way to connect those customers to a product that solves their problem, right? But the greater number of these transactional authorities that exist out there that make it easy for a government person to acquire a technology from the commercial sector, I think the better off we are as a nation in sort of delivering the best solution at the lowest price to the taxpayer.
So I think you make a really great point, which is to delineate, will the solution arise just by throwing dollars at it, or is this a fundamental, we need a innovation or a new insight here to continue to make progress? So maybe with, once we found the transformer model, it really is just a matter of, first, trying to simultaneously find more efficient ways to improve the weights in your model, but also at the same time, you really do just have to throw a bunch of GPUs at the problem and spend a lot of money to build a really intelligent model. Whereas if we go back and think about the discovery of the transformer architecture, maybe it really was just that you have to wait for that type of architecture innovation to come into the fore before you can really start throwing effort and dollars at the problem.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes like technology innovation surprises you. You're like, holy crap, this is something we didn't expect, right? And then our responsibility is to figure out how you can leverage it in as many ways as possible, right? And those those changes can go, like those use cases could go in directions that we never expected.
So as a VC then, how would you characterize your style? Do you have a thesis on, I think that this type of technology is kind of getting better and you'll be able to kind of ride the innovation wave? Or is it, we don't really know when the technology will be good enough, so we just have to kind of continually look for companies to back, and hopefully one of them can kind of you know, take a crack at solving a problem? Like, is it kind of sitting back and waiting for the right time, or is it mostly just taking action now until the problems are solved?
Yeah, look, I think sitting back is not my style, and I think not our team's style. I would suggest that, like, what sort of the way we think about the world differently is, um, uh, I don't want to wait to see what's happening in technology and wait for someone to write an article about it, right? Like, our team actually attends academic conferences
Right.
in machine learning and AI, right? And the reason for that is I think it's our responsibility to understand two things. One is, like, what is actually happening at the cutting edge of machine learning and AI, and two, what are the really interesting vertical applications, use cases that this can be applied against, right? I think what can make us differentiated as an investor, and I think entrepreneurs should be thinking about this as a guideline for how to build a business, is one, what is the technology innovation that's happened in the last 6 months, 12 months, 18 months that makes the thing I'm going to build something that couldn't have built 5 years ago, 10 years ago, right? Like and like that means you have to stay on top of what's happening in technology. Like, what is the thing that a LLM today that can do today that a traditional NLP algorithm couldn't do 5 years ago? And if you could have built the product you're thinking about building 5 years ago with technology from 5 years ago, let me assure you that, like, somebody's already tried it, and there's a reason why there's not a big business opportunity for you, right? And so, like, that's like number one thing you have to understand. And second is, you've got to marry that with a deep understanding of, like, hey, what is, like, the way in which people work in a particular industry, and how can that technology apply to make that person or that company more profitable, more efficient, et cetera, right? And so I think it's that combination. Knowing both those things is important. We're not waiting around. We're trying to spend our time, learning about every new additional innovation that's happening on the one side, and then every like every use case we can, like, really learn about and get deep into on the other side, so that we can marry those two things and find companies that match those two.
So I think what you're talking about is actually, there's a kind of meta philosophy around that, which is a one might describe as a bias towards action. So maybe if you just kind of knock on enough doors, you do your homework, you dive deeply into the technical details, you dive into the market, you'll find the right solution by mere fact of just attacking the problem in the right way over and over and over again through kind of willpower, a kind of sheer force of will. Which is a very interesting kind of a meta philosophy of investing. So maybe you could dive into, you've mentioned that you believe AI will lead to a second industrial revolution. Could you elaborate on some specific industries or sectors where you see AI will have a transformative impact in the near future?
Yeah, I guess I'll answer it in a slightly off kilter way, right? Like, I believe that, sort of taking a step back to the sort of first industrial revolution, right? When people developed mechanization, the steam engine, right? It was this capability to basically use machines to replace muscle power, right? So steam replaced muscles. And, like, I'd actually make the argument that the developers of that technology had no idea all the different ways in which it could be applied, right? It turned out it was applied in transportation. We get steam engine trains, right? It was applied in the manufacturing of apparel, right? Like, all of a sudden you had looms or steam powered instead of human powered, right? And I think the same is true here, right? Like, the corollary here is, just like muscle power is replaced by steam power, I think that if your role involves sitting in front of a computer and doing something with a computer, like information work, I believe that, like, machine learning and AI is going to transform your job, right? There are tasks that you are doing today that you should not have to do, and that, like, AI will either automate or augment. And so, like, I think every industry where you have people in front of a computer is going to be materially different 20 years from now. And if it's not, if you're at a company that hasn't applied this technology to make your people more efficient or effective, like, you are going to be out of business, right? It's like, I honestly, like, I remember, it's going to sound crazy, but, like, I'm old enough that when I started working, we were one of the first few, like, sort of sets of college students that joined the company I joined, where everybody was given a computer. Now, could you imagine starting a job today where, like, you weren't giving a computer to do a job. Like, it's just what you do. It's like, hey, your first thing you do is you get your smartphone, you get like your laptop, and you're off to work and your job. And I think the same is going to be true 20 years from now. If there's not like, hey, here's your machine, but it has some tools that are like, that or AI is assisting you in some part of your job. If you're not offering your employees that, like, you should give up now. Like, or you're not thinking about offering that, because like you're just not going to succeed in the worker of the future is going to be augmented, and your workers, if you're not, like, you're just not going to survive.
Well, let's pause there because, so when I talk to executives outside of AI, there is a really big hesitancy when people from San Francisco or Seattle or just kind of the tech world say things like that. And the biggest pushback I get is, I already use analytics in, my ERP system. It helped me. I got some good insights into my business. Maybe diving into what you mean by your employees will be outcompeted. What I think we mean by that is there was an analytical revolution in AI, but there's also now this generative component where if your output is natural language or it's programmatic language, you will be displaced if you don't use this tool. So maybe you could just dive into your thoughts on what you mean when you say you will not be able to compete.
Yeah, I think it's actually, I think you hit at one very, very important use case, which is like, if your job is output oriented, I'm writing code, I'm writing emails, I'm writing, chat messages, etc. But I would take one step further. I think that one of the amazing things about this generative technology is its ability to use tools and understand tasks, and to automate the set of tasks that are necessary to actually accomplish a goal, right? It's not just about, can you help me write this email, right? If you think about, I think that, how do I say this? One of the frameworks we use to think about this, right? And I think that the way in which I think a lot of founders are thinking about how to use AI, like I said, in a less efficient way, is a lot of folks think about the sort of the human being the center of the workflow, right? We call that a human-centric workflow. It's like, hey, imagine I'm a salesperson, right? My job is to connect with a bunch of people, potential customers, right? And so it's like, my tasks are, I go into email, I go into my CRM, I see this is a lead. I grab that lead, I go into my email application, I write an email. I then go back into the CRM and I update it, say I reached out to this candidate. Then I do X, I do Y, right? And I'm going. So I'm the core of the workflow, the hub of the workflow, and I go into these different tools. And what I hear from a lot of founders are like, hey, what I'm going to do is build an AI that will help you update your CRM automatically. I'm going to build an AI that will write you an email that's better than the email you would have written. I'm going to build an AI that does something else for you, right? I'll listen to your call and give you coaching, right? These are all the types of AIs I see. And all of them are amazing, interesting tools, and I think could be good companies. I would argue, though, sort of posit that the way the world is going is, instead of the human being the center of the workflow, the model should be the center of the workflow, right? It should be pushing tasks to you, being like, hey, I saw that these are the 30 leads that we got. Do you think we should, here are the 5 I think we should reach out to. Should we reach out to them? You're like, yeah, this makes sense. I think these are the 5 of the 30, they're the best, right? And then it's like, hey, I wrote these 5 emails to reach out to them. What do you think? And you go and you edit those emails slightly because you want to make sure you introduce your flavor to it, right? And you write those. It automatically updates the CRM. And it's like, hey, this person wrote back to us saying they're happy to have a call. I think we should do the demo that has this. What do you think? It's like, oh yeah, it is about using the human being for the thing that they are best at, which is exercising judgment, and not forcing them to think about every single step of the process that gets you from step 1, which was I got a lead, all the way to closing the deal, right? And I give sales as an example, but I think you could think about that across every workflow. The real opportunity for AI is to stop thinking about it as it's going to be a task augmentation, but rather a workflow augmentation. And when you think about it in that landscape, that's what gets you not the 30% improvement in your efficiency, but I now reach out to 10 times the number of people I used to. I close 10 times the number of deals. I work with 10 times the number of customers that I used to. I think that's the opportunity for AI.
What you're pointing to, I think, is a critical part of how AI will change the way it's integrated into a workflow. So particularly, tasks are sort of an analyst, or tasks are an associate. Many of those, why do those tasks exist? Because you want to be able to free up a manager-like role, so that they can kind of have an initial take before, have someone else kind of do the initial work, and then they can kind of refine that in their own liking, in their own style. And I think what will happen, as you kind of alluded to, is someone may no longer be a person doing that initial take. It'll be a model. And some of my research at Stanford is focused on how do you piece together pipelines of models and retrieval models as well, language models and retrieval models, to put together a pipeline that can become your secret sauce, as opposed to having a bunch of humans that are, the pipeline is dependent upon the human. It's now going to be dependent upon your retrieval model and your language models, and humans will, so to speak, be in the loop. But I think there's different perspectives on what we mean by human in the loop.
That's right, 100%, right? And I think, like I said, it's philosophically, what I believe is, like, I think a lot of folks are thinking about the co-pilot as being the answer. It's like, hey, the human's in the driver's seat and there's a co-pilot. I like to think of the AIs in the driver's seat, not to say that the AI is going to be our overlords, but rather it's going to drive the workflow forward. And your job is to do the thing that you are best at, which is exercising judgment, right?
Yeah, right.
And so, like, what you want to do is take the mundane part of the job, which is like, hey, what's the next step I have to take, out of the hands of the human being, right? Like, if like you were just being fed, hey, here's the next thing you need to do, you could do an excellent job of that thing you are fed next, right? You want to not leave you with time like, hey, so what should I do next to make sure that I am effective? You're like, you're wasting brain power on something that I actually think the AI can do an excellent job of.
Right. So we've discussed kind of potential. What do we mean when we say AI will be a second industrial revolution? So then there's what you're going to do about it. So maybe you can speak to, as someone who's deeply involved in kind of AI technology and deep tech. First of all, how do you define deep tech? And then what are you looking for when you're valuing potential investments? Or is your more investing style to be, some people are more, they try to look for good opportunities and be more reactive to those good opportunities.
Yep.
Like, curious to kind of hear your stylistic approach to these developments.
Sure. There's a few questions there. I'll answer them, I think, serially. What do I consider deep tech? I think deep tech is making investments in companies where a real advance in science or in engineering has led to something that's being possible now that it wasn't possible before, right? So like a real advancement's required. That's what deep tech is to me. My criteria, it's sort of, I'll give you a generic, my generic view on venture capital, and then I'll give you very specific to AI, right? So I think that as early stage investors, what I look for changes between seed, Series A, Series B, and beyond, right? At seed, really what I'm looking for is just two things, right? Is this a market opportunity that is large enough that can lead to a multi-billion-dollar outcome, right? And two, is this a founder that I want to go to battle with, like, for the next decade of my life, right? It's that simple, right? I think anything beyond that, is, I think, somewhat of a fool's errand, right? You're talking about there's two people, their dog, and a PowerPoint is like where you're investing. And so if you're looking at their financial model and if you're like, doing a bunch of other analyses, like, I don't know if there's very much to see. Like, there's no product market fit yet. This is a seed investment. By the time you get to a Series A, you take those first two things that are still matter. Is this a large enough market? Is this a team you want to go to battle with? And then you add one thing to that, which is, do they have early signs of product market fit? Have they built a product that is interesting, that customers are like, hey, I actually see value in this, right? When you get to the Series B, you add one additional thing to that, right? So now I've got founding team I want to go to battle with, is a big enough market, early signs of product market fit, but now early signs that, like, there's a sales motion that you can actually sell this thing, right? Specifically, when I think about AI, I think that has changed a lot, right? And so, we sort of co-authored an article in, the Wall Street Journal a number of years ago, where we talk about how, like, we thought that models will run the world, right? As, sort of like a take on the software will eat the world. We're like, hey, we think models will run them. And one of our assertions was at the time that we believe strongly in something called a model-driven business. This is a company that uses its data assets to iteratively improve their products in ways that made it really, really defensible in the long run, right? So, like, the canonical example you'd use is like Netflix, where, like, because they saw the behavior of you watching what shows, et cetera, like, and how long you spent time watching it, it gave them an advantage that seemed insurmountable because they had a deep understanding of what their people watched. They were much better deciding what shows to renew, what shows to actually produce, right? And something like 80% of the, I think this is a stat that like, may no longer be accurate, but at the time, like 80% of the shows and movies that people watch on Netflix were from their recommended first page. You can watch 150,000 things on there, but like they were really good at knowing what you're going to watch. And you can think about your own Netflix behavior. And it's probably true that you're like, rarely are you searching for things. It's like pretty much just clicking on something that they show you, right? And I think that that thesis in my mind held true and was like our philosophy or how we invested like in AI companies until sort of the advent of foundational models, these large language models. And because we felt like there was such a huge advantage to people who were able to build this proprietary data asset, because it allowed them to build algorithms that were so much better than sophisticated anyone else. And all of a sudden, here comes this class of algorithms basically trained on like everything, right? And so it's like, wait, all this huge advantage that you accrued over like a long period of time suddenly is gone. Like, right. Okay, like now how do I differentiate, right? And I still think that there sort of now, like I would say, sort of two things that matter, right? And you already see this. I don't know how much you spend time, I imagine you do, playing around with like all the various sort of large language model things. But like I would assert to you that one of the reasons people like using ChatGPT, perhaps more than they do Bard, et cetera, is like they have more, more human feedback. Their reinforcement learning has had more cycles. And so there is an advantage that still accrues to, to improving your model. But I think that like the real advantage for companies, and this is the thing that we're really looking for, is sort of specificity, right? Like I think that like we are like really, really focused these days on sort of vertical specific, role specific kind of models, because I think that back to this thing I was saying to you earlier, we think the real market opportunity is to take over whole workflows, not individual tasks. And in order to take over a whole workflow, you have to deeply understand what a person in a specific job is doing in a specific industry. And so if you are generically trying to be like, oh, we're going to help people write emails, or we're going to help like salespeople in some, like, I just think it's extraordinarily hard to like build a defensible long-term business, because anybody that has access to like high quality language model can build a product that looks very similar to yours, right? So we've really turned the corner to that specificity being a key thing, and clear view on how to like, to instead of augmenting the workflow, replacing the workflow from being human-centric to model-centric.
So there's two really important things that you just mentioned. One is that, sort of prior to the foundation model, the democratization of foundation models, a lot of companies were building out their data science practices in the hopes that data could be their competitive moat, and then use these models to kind of to create a larger moat. And I think what I've heard a lot of from companies is that they did it, and the problem is it didn't really dramatically improve the results. And I think there's a caveat that people didn't mention, which is you have to do data science really well. So Netflix, it made a dramatic improvement, quantitatively in the customer experience. So if you are, just to keep it very general, if you're a retail company or you're an automotive company and you're investing in an AI, just because you spend a lot of money, millions of dollars on a data science team, you have to make that a core competency and do it extraordinarily well in order for that competitive moat to take hold and for it to grow. The second thing you mentioned, which is the emergence of foundation models and how that changed the entire landscape. And I totally agree. And I saw the exact same thing that you're talking about. And I think what foundation models did was that before there was a bunch of prior tasks that that verticalized LLMs or language models had to do. So for example, back in the day, when I was making sort of financial LLMs, financial focused LLMs, you'd have to do you have to train it for named entity recognition. And so first step in the pipeline you have to train it for, and then there's a bunch of series of different abilities you have to incorporate before you can finally get to the point where you're saying, break down your revenue performance and describe that for me. Now with LLMs, a lot of those concepts can be prepackaged and learned. So then we can grow from there. We can then start kind of going into training for these task specific features and roles, and we don't have to spend as much time and resources on some of the more foundational learning about nouns and verbs and adjectives like we used to do in our NLP pipelines.
I think that's right. I think you've got it right. Like it just changes like what the starting point is for what you're going to build, right? And to your earlier point, right? Like there's a I would argue that 90% of data science teams aren't really adding value, right? And it's because like at the highest levels of the company, they haven't really made that leap to being like, they just see it as it's a department in my company, as opposed to, hey, it is the core competitive advantage that's going to drive our business. It's going to make us deliver better product to our customer, or better value to our customer, or deliver faster, or whatever, right? They just see it as a thing that can check the box. And like, if that's the case, like, I can assure you're going to get nothing out of it. So.
And yeah, and one last thing to point to make is, if you ask executives, what do you think is your competitive advantage? And they might say is, our ability to synthesize information and take action on that information. Well, how can you do that at scale, and how can you do that in a better quality way? It's by investing in your IT and your data science teams. And if I look at your P&L right now, your actions are speaking louder than your words, and you're not doing that. So anyways, next question is really around your approach to research, and involving and kind of engaging with experts. Can you, and you mentioned you go to conferences, and we'll be at NeurIPS, as our paper was accepted at NeurIPS. And so I love hearing that your team is going to conferences, and that means a lot, I think, to a lot of technical folks that are listening. Can you share an example of a conversation that profoundly influenced your understanding or investment decisions in the world of AI or technology, where you kind of had a light bulb moment, or having that conversation with someone in the weeds really changed your philosophy?
Yeah. I can think of a bunch, but I guess the bigger the comment I would leave with folks, and I think it's like the important lesson is, I rarely think that like light bulb moments happen the way people think they do, right? I think that it's been my experience that the way in which you like learn a lot from experts is by having lots of conversations, and each conversation is like a breadcrumb on a trail that gets you to what you believe about a particular area. And I used to have a goal for all my team where, like, you talk about like people's individual goals. I used to want to see, like, I call it, I want to see the receipts, right? I wanted to see the coffee meetings that folks were having. I wanted to see the coffee receipts. And funny, we're talking about coffee again. But the whole idea here was, it's like your view on a subject is based off of the dozen, the 2 dozen, the 3 dozen conversations that you had, not any one conversation where it's like, oh my God, now I believe that I see the light. LLMs are going to be the future, or I see the light, right? Like, self-driving cars are going to dominate the world. It's more that each conversation guides you in a particular direction and allows you to ask better questions in the next conversation you have, et cetera, right? And I think that like it actually influences how I sort of guide my founders as well, right? Like, back to this assertion I'm making, I think our responsibility is to take 2 dozen conversations and synthesize that for ourselves to come up with a view that we have on the world, right? And I think the founders I work with, I try to treat in the same way. I don't try to say, hey, you could see, the answer could be A, but it could be B, or it could be C. Like, they know it could be A or B or C. You're not giving them advice, right? And so a lot of the folks I work with think I'm far more opinionated than I really am. And it's because I believe my responsibility is to give them a point of view, a clear one. And their job is to take my point of view, another board member's point of view, another advisor's point of view, and synthesize that to do what they think is best, right? And so I'd rather just clearly articulate a specific viewpoint, because it allows them to use that to synthesize for them what they want, right? And when I have conversations with experts, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for like, yeah, it could be A, it could be B. Like, I know it could be A or it could be. I'm asking what you think, right? And so that's how like I try to guide my engagement with founders. I'm really specific in my question asking so that I can get a point of view, take good notes out of the next conversation, and then use those breadcrumbs to synthesize the view that I care about.
So then maybe we could dive into how you keep at the edge of a field, and if wording is a continuous theme in your career, like, could you share a recent sort of trend or area that really fascinated you? How did you dive into the topic to learn more? Because, and I'll give you the background on why I'm asking this, because people would ask me, what are my thoughts at a high level of what's going on in AI? And maybe I read a bunch of papers in one super specific niche, but oftentimes when you're in the ground and you're kind of in the weeds, you don't see the overall forest, right? You miss the forest for the trees. So curious how you kind of find that balance between, we kind of mentioned talking to experts, but at the same time, making sure you're keeping the right level of generalization to see what's going on in the entire ecosystem.
Sure. I would say it starts first with intellectual curiosity, right? You've got to like, I don't know, I think I have the best job in the world. I get to chat with really smart people like yourself and like learn from them, and like I get paid to do it. So like this is great. And I think if you've got that attitude, you'll find yourself like naturally going and having more conversations to sort of fill out your worldview on different topics. But I think that like if your worldview is that, like it's I think that, like advice number one, like never be afraid to reach out to somebody. Like you read something, like I think people read like an article or they see somebody on LinkedIn, like, oh, this is a really cool thing this person said. Like reach out to them. What's the worst that can happen? They cannot respond. Well, like, okay, guess what? The cost of communication, the outbound communication, particularly in a post-GPT world, has just come down. So you can craft a beautiful email to them, be like, hey, I'd love to chat with you about X. And I think there's so much more, like what they can synthesize in an article they wrote or in a podcast they did is a tiny fraction, hopefully, of what they really know. So try to engage, right? And like my thing is like, if to the extent that you can get hands-on experience in a thing, like it's really important. I was recently I got really interested in learning about talent assessment, right? I figured, hey, we're in this, we're in the venture business. I said to you earlier, like, hey, at Seed, what matters is this a founder you want to go to battle with? Like, how do you assess that this is a talented person that you want to work with for a long time? It's like, there's got to be science to this. So, read a couple of books, read a bunch of papers, listened to some, watch some YouTube videos, read some, listened to some podcasts. But then I talked to a bunch of people who do talent assessment for a living. And all those things were valuable and it gave me a point of view. But ultimately, I thought the most valuable experience was like I had someone do a talent assessment for me, and I did a bunch of talent assessment, like online talent assessments, and I had people on my team do talent assessments, and then we like looked at that information about, hey, do we think this can be predictive? And long story short, I don't know that I believe it's a science that can lead you to believe this is a good founder or not, and so we don't subject all of our founders to take some talent assessment and decide if we're going to invest or not based on that. But I do think what I've learned from all that experience is it's potentially really, really valuable for me to have somebody do an assessment because it helps me work with the person better. Knowing people's strengths and weaknesses and their work style is a really interesting, is a really great way, especially if you're going to work with a founder for 10 years or work with somebody on your team for the next 10, 20 years of your life to like understand them and what makes them tick and what you can do as an individual to be better suited to working with them, right? And so like I didn't get the answer I wanted, which was that like, hey, here's the magic formula to tell you like is this a founder you want to work with or not. But it did give me a completely different but important lesson, which is, hey, it's still worth doing because it'll make you a better partner to them.
So we've started off with kind of your understanding of the AI landscape, zoned in on how you're taking action on that, but maybe we can start to zoom out a little bit more, and you can go into like, what do you see as the most pressing ethical or societal challenges facing AI, and how can individuals and organizations address them responsibly as we move forward? Because when I talk to engineers in the Valley, their biggest focus is, how do I optimize the training of a model? How do I implement RAG into my system? When I talk to non-technical people, the biggest thing I hear is, how do I implement privacy and security? And really, that can be an afterthought for a lot of AI engineers. So maybe you could think about some of these ethical or societal challenges that you're thinking about as well.
Yeah, I don't spend a bunch of time worrying about privacy and security, not because I don't think they're important topics, but because I think those are like, I would say, tactical issues that technology can help to solve, right? I think there's two big societal considerations that we need to think about. And we'll go through them one at a time. So the first one really has to do with like, what is this technology adoption going to do for so the job ecosystem in this country and in others, et cetera, right? It's a thing that I don't worry a ton about, right? Because I'm this firm believer that like in the long run, technology advancement actually leads to sort of more work to be done, meaning there's more stuff that can be done as a result. People are more efficient, but that doesn't mean there's like less work to do. There's more work to do, and so there's just as many jobs as before. But the speed with which these transformations happen can have short-term impacts on jobs. So like the mechanization of manufacturing and of other industries took like 20, 30, 40 years, right? Like it took a long time to replace people doing muscle power to be replaced by steam power. I don't think this transformation is going to take 20, 30, 40 years,
Right.
right? And so it takes it. We have to think about it like as a society about like, hey, what are we willing to accept? Like, how fast are we willing to accept certain things changing? What does that mean for jobs in an industry? I think it's very easy to sort of villainize, like, sort of labor coming together to be like, hey, we want to prevent technology from being applied in our industry in some way, shape, or form. And really, we have to be thoughtful about that. So that's like sort of societal issue number one. I think we have to think about it. It's an important consideration that, like, because specifically of how fast this technology can be introduced. There's a second one that like we honestly ought to think about. I think we've, and this is, I would say I'm putting on my hat for my time, really thinking about being sort of America first and thinking about sort of our society. But like we already live in a culture where people like don't trust what's being said, and I think that problem is only going to be exacerbated, right? And it's so easy to create like seemingly, you know, reasonable things that you're like, oh my god, and you believe that thing, and like it changes your worldview in ways that like are hard to like come back from. And I think I worry a lot, about how easy it is to, create something that sounds like Shri said X, Y, or Z and put it on the internet, or and how we should regulate that. What is the responsibility of platforms that like allow people to publish material that may not have been created, like created or authorized by the person whose likeness is being used, et cetera. Like I think these are like the two principal issues that like I really am concerned about.
Final question, closing question. What is the AI industry going to look like in 1 year from now? So you've described here are the set of challenges. Here's what we need to think about society. But if you had to put a flag in the sand, and many people are very uncomfortable, making such a bold statement of what the world will look like. But it's always makes for more interesting conversation. So curious to hear.
I think if we had this conversation in November of 2024, we'll be directly in the trough of disillusionment about generative AI, right? I think as you look at the last 6 months, every board is talking about AI. Everyone's talking about their AI strategy. Every public company wants to have an AI strategy. And it all sounds great. I haven't seen a whole lot of like willingness to rethink their industry, their company, to actually use the technology to create the kinds of advantages they want. They just want to check a box. And so what's going to happen is a whole lot of like haymaking, a whole lot of hiring consultants, a whole lot of not a bunch of value being added. And in many ways, like, will be the companies will look at themselves a year from now. Like we spent $8 million to have company X come in and build us a LLM, LLM specific to us. And it's like, it does nothing. It's like, yeah, because you never thought about how it could be leveraged, right? And I don't think it's a terrible thing. I actually think that like we have an amazing new tool in the form of foundational models, and we have to find really great ways to make them more effective. But the technology is kind of the easy part now. It's like that workflow improvement that is the hard part, and that's not a simple thing. It's a thing that takes time and energy and thoughtfulness to take advantage of. And I really do think that the companies that are put in that thought and spend time like improving, like making, going from the human-centric workflow to the model-centric workflow and improving their workers, they're going to win. But that won't change the fact that a year from now, everyone's going to be like, what the hell? This is completely worthless. I can't believe I spent $10 million on X and got nothing from it.
Right. No, I totally agree. I mean, we saw this with VR. I think that the bottom of the disillusionment was when Zuckerberg came out with that initial cut of VR, and then when Apple released the VR headset, there was a initial kind of boost back into VR and a lot of potential investment in the area. So it's crazy how accurate that sort of cycle is at describing the way the tech world works. All right, everyone. So first of all, thank you, Shri, for joining us today. And everyone in the Collective Nation, as we wrap up another episode of the podcast, I want to express my gratitude to you and our curious and passionate listener. Today's discussion has once again illuminated the terrain of AI, offering us a rare glimpse into the minds shaping the field. As always, we're building this podcast with the Gen AI Collective community, so please reach out with any feedback or suggestions. If you'd like to be a guest in the Collective Community podcast, please get in touch. Details for doing so will be in the show notes. or podcast description. And if you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the Collective Intelligence Community Podcast, please leave a review or comment on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.